Eyal, may we begin?
You're the commander, my friend.
Okay, welcome everyone. So we have people joining us today from around the world, from the United States, Canada, Europe, Israel, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and many other nations. And it's an honor welcoming every single one of you. My name is Avi Kaner. I've been working over the past few years to share examples of tolerance and coexistence, especially as it pertains with Israel and the Middle Eastern region. We have much more in common than we have differences. I'm humbled by having all of you join us today. Today, we will learn about the Good Neighbor campaign run by Israel to help 250,000 Syrian civilians. That's right, 250,000 senior civilians affected by Syria's brutal civil war. We're honored to welcome two distinguished speakers and an internationally acclaimed moderator. I consider all of them my friends. First, we would like to welcome Lieutenant Colonel Eyal Dror, joining us live from Israel. Eyal was the commander of Operation Good Neighbor campaign. It was an operational unit under the IDF Northern Command, whose function was the management of humanitarian assistance to Syrian civilians, the victims of the civil war. During his command, Israel carried out countless humanitarian aid operations on the Israeli-Syrian border, home to terrorist organizations such as ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and Hezbollah. Eyal's unit saved the lives of many thousands of Syrian civilians. You will hear about this today, including personal stories never heard before. We would also like to welcome Aboud Dandachi. Aboud is a former Syrian refugee, and he is joining us live from Toronto, Canada. Aboud lived in the Syrian city of Homs. During the civil war, he was interviewed regularly by the BBC and other international media outlets. He is today a regular contributor to the J.ca and has been published in numerous publications. He is also my hero and people's hero on Twitter, continuing to fight the battle online every single day and to educate people around the globe. He will share unique perspectives on Syria that will shine a light on the past, present, and future of the country and its residents. Finally, it is my honor to welcome today's moderator, Michelle McCory. Michelle is an internationally acclaimed television journalist, news anchor, reporter, and producer. She has worked as an anchor and reporter for I-24, Bloomberg, CNN, and others. Michelle has covered and analyzed the biggest global economic, financial, and geopolitical events of the past decade. I recently watched her interview with Bibi Netanyahu. So Eyal and Aboud, you don't have to be so nervous. I mean, you know, Bibi can do it, you guys can do it. There's literally no better television journalist covering the Middle East than Michelle McCory. We thank her for moderating today's very informative event. At the end of the presentation, we will open up the discussion to questions and answers. So please use the chat feature at the bottom of the screen to send questions, and we'll try to get to as many of them as possible. So ladies and gentlemen, welcome Michelle McCory and Eyal and Aboud.
All right, Avi, thank you so much for that fantastic introduction. Also, a special shout out to some participants in South Africa and the United Kingdom. As you say, Abu, we have a truly global audience, and this is a story that has global consequences. And Avi, I want to start off by thanking you for hosting this webinar, because right now we're all inundated with so much negativity, constant coronavirus headlines, the toll that the pandemic has taken economically and socioeconomically, and of course, all of the political tensions that are very high in the US and elsewhere. And it's good to tell the story now because it's an affirmation of positivity. It's a reminder of the triumph of the human spirit. It's a story that shows human compassion and kindness in the darkest of times. And as cliched as it may sound, it shows that there are rays of light and silver linings in dark times. And of course, we're talking about Operation Good Neighbor, which was the Israeli initiative to help Syrian civilians during the Syrian civil war. So who better to give us a background on that than Eyal Dror, who was, as we just mentioned, the commander of the Good Neighbor Directorate, which was an operational unit under the IDF Northern Command. So Eyal, let's start off with you. And why don't we begin with giving a basic background as to Israel's involvement in the conflict, set the scene for us in terms of Israel's positioning in the Golan Heights, and give us some details of the civil war at that time.
So thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Avi, and hello, Abud, my friend. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening for all the audience. And I will start immediately. I will show with you a presentation that will be able to give you the understanding about the situation. And I want to start with this slide because this is one of my favorite in order to understand Operation Good Neighbor. It's written here in Arabic, Shukran Israel ala al-musa'ada wal-hub. It means thank you Israel for the help and for the love, a picture drawn by an Syrian child, something that was behind of an imagination a few years ago and become reasonable thanks to Operation Good Neighbor. And we will skip to understand where it happened. So as you might know, this is the state of Israel, and in our northern border, we have Syria, a very big country regarding to Israel. And this is the blue spot. This is the Golan Heights area. This is the area that the Israeli-Syrian border, 100 kilometers, 60 miles of border that was very quiet border since the end of the Yom Kippur War in 73. For over than 40 years, there wasn't any terror attack from that border. However, something has been changed. In the Middle East, it wasn't regarding to the state of Israel. It was internal procedures happening in the Arab world, as most of you may become familiar with the name, the Arab Spring, which began in 2011 and reached very quickly to the state of Syria. But instead of just a civilian protest and demonstration against the regime, it became a very tragic war, a lot of casualties, destruction. And what happened that on the Israeli-Syrian border, we had two challenges. First of all, we found this border located with ISIS, Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda, and other radical Islamic groups that swore to destroy the state of Israel. And on the other hand, we find on that border 250,000 people, Syrians that lost almost everything, people that were living, like you can see in that picture, in tents, without electricity, without a lot of food, basic needs that we are in our world are even not say thank you for. It wasn't in that time in Syria, 250,000 of them people, and let me add that were educated to hate the state of Israel by the regime propaganda. So this is the small introduction to understand. This is, by the way, a picture of an emergency room in one of their hospitals. And this is how Israel reached to Operation Good Neighbor. It began in 2013 while we decided to take care for wounded Syrian people and become very quickly in 2016 to a huge operation in which Israel increased dramatically the humanitarian aid provided to the Syrian by taking care for children, establishing projects, supporting hundreds of thousands of equipment, from medicines to diesel fuel, from food to clothes. This is in general. Back to you, Michelle.
Right, Eyal, give us a little bit more detail of the brutality that these civilians were enduring and more information on exactly what the aid facilities were that Israel was setting up.
So if you want to understand how brutally it was the war, please take a look, picture on that right slide. I can say that as a person who served 24 years in the army, unfortunately, I saw my soldiers wounded and I saw my friends dying. But this picture, it was for me one of the most terrible events, because one night we were calling we were called to reach the border fence when entire family has reached the border, and they all were wounded. Now, I don't know if you can see, but this boy is between 13 to 14 years old. He reached the border fence with his twin brother and the entire family because a bomb hit their home. Now, they weren't terrorists, they were civilians, but the regime propaganda was to just throw bombs on the civilian facilities. And for me, this event was one of the most tragic events because they were reaching the border fence, burned almost to death. Now, in the days of evacuating wounded, it was an agreement between the army to some of the hospitals in the north of Israel. We have 3 of them that the wounded will be evacuated, those wounded. This young boy, we couldn't take him to the northern hospitals because they weren't such qualified to deal with such a severe wounded. So we had to call in a helicopter in order to fly him to Tel Aviv hospital, which is more a strong hospital with more abilities. So this was one picture that can describe the meaning of a civil war. I can say that night by night, we saw people coming, burning, people that lost their hands, their legs, people that were in severe conditions. And the state of Israel decided to open the border fence in order to save their lives. 4,500 wounded. And again, when I'm speaking about wounded, I'm not speaking as we were blamed by the regime. I'm not speaking about warriors. I'm speaking about men and women and children that were targeting by the regime.
Eyal, just staying with you for a few more minutes. Why did Israel decide to do this? This is a tremendous use of resources. It puts Israeli soldiers and medics at risk, bringing in Syrians. You don't know who could be civilians, who could be operatives. What was Israel's incentive in taking on this mission?
So to understand the meaning, well, we're Jewish people, and I'm not embarrassed to say that we are educating on values of mutual aid and compassion. We understood that there is here an opportunity. Based on those values and based on the understanding that those Syrian people do not familiar with the state of Israel. They has been brainwashed centuries about how bad we are and they used to call us devils. But we understood that there is here a unique opportunity to change their perspective about Israel, not by speaking, by doing. And if you will take a look at this picture, I will ask you a question. This woman and this boy, which is connected to one of the operations of the Good Neighbor, the doctor's visit operation, which was the most exciting operation that we experienced, why they have to suffer because of civil war? Why this boy cannot get treatment in the hospital? The answer, because if he will go to the hospitals of the regime, nobody will take care of him. So as is Israel, we understood that we can reach them and help them. And maybe when they will meet us, and it's an amazing fact, in the hospitals in Israel, in the northern part of Israel, 50% of the crew is speaking Arabic because they are Druze and Muslims and Arab Christians, and they are speaking their language. So with this connection between Israelis to Syrians, maybe we'll be able to create something new. And as we will go on, I will try to show you and prove you that it has been happened.
Well, Aboud, it's safe to say that you were one of those people that considered Israel to be the enemy, a vile, devilish force. I understand that you were, in fact, a supporter of Hezbollah before Operation Good Neighbors. So tell us a little bit about your background and your experience. You were in Syria during this time. Tell us about that.
Hi, so yeah, I'm Aboud, originally from the city of Homs, and I was in Syria up until 2000 until late 2013. So I moved to Turkey in late 2013. This is when we started to see reports on the internet about the assistance that the IDF in Israel was given to wounded Syrians when the first stories started to come out. And I didn't believe it at first because in the Middle East, one does not help one's adversaries. Let me just give you an idea how incredible this was, Israel's assistance to Syrians. In Syria, with everything that's going on, if you get shot and you go to a hospital, the first thing the doctors will ask you isn't where were you shot, they'll ask you who shot you. Because if it was the army that shot you, no hospital will treat you in Syria. You have to tell them that the terrorists shot you if you want to get the medical treatment in a government hospital in Syria. It is just unprecedented. You were talking about 250,000 Syrians who were assisted by Israel. And so you mentioned that I was a supporter of Hezbollah. Well, supporter is actually a pretty, it's a much stronger term than I would use. I would say that in the war in 2006, the conflict between Lebanon and Hezbollah in 2006, I was there sitting in Saudi Arabia, away from it all, but I was rooting for Hezbollah. I don't think there was an Arab who wasn't rooting for Hezbollah. I actually, it would be like the same interest one would show in a football match, so to speak. I actually thought that the British politician, for example, George Galloway, was a friend of the Arabs, a hero. The way that he would go on news programs and defend the Arab perspective. So fast forward to 2013, and Hezbollah are in Syria, killing Syrians. Iranians are in Syria, killing Syrians. Lebanese, other Lebanese political parties, the SSNP, have sent its mercenaries into Syria to kill Syrians. The people who we thought were our friends actually turned out to be pretty atrocious people. So you're sitting there, you don't know. I'm sitting in Istanbul. I don't know who my friend from my foe is anymore. And then it was around there in early 2014 when Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu went and visited some wounded Syrians on the Golan, and this was the first public acknowledgement, I believe, one of the first ones by the Israeli government that they were actually helping Syrians on the Golan. And pictures came out and they were published on the internet. And the reaction of what passed for the Syrian opposition at the official Syrian opposition at the time, the National Coalition, was horrendous. They actually put out a statement condemning Benjamin Netanyahu, saying that he's exploiting their wounded. Syria and Israel are always going to be enemies, and that was the breaking point for me. That was it. I had started a blog in Istanbul at the time, and I actually wrote a blog post directed at the National Coalition, and I told them, look, why can't you just say thank you? Why can't you just show gratitude to people who are helping you? You know, who's going to trust you in the future if you can't even say two simple words, thank you? I think they realized that it was a pretty stupid stance to take, and they took down their statement afterwards. But yeah, that for me was the breaking point. Yeah.
Aboud, did you have any sort of contact with people that directly benefited from this aid, that were victims of brutality?
Oh yes, I spoke to them by phone. I remember this older person who told me that he actually came to the Golan because he needed cancer treatment, even at the level of cancer treatment. I mean, when we say assistance and treatment, we're not talking about superficial things like here's a Band-Aid and here's a bandage and go home. We're talking about millions and millions, untold millions of dollars spent on facial reconstructions, limb replacements, cancer treatment. This old person that I spoke to on the Golan, his relatives could not speak. His sons were in Syria. They contacted me in Turkey so that I could speak to their father on the internet on the Golan. He was telling me he's got cancer. He's very old, but they're treating them so well. You know, he was just amazed at the treatment that they were receiving. He said they're treating us like I'm their son, basically. That's what he said of the doctors and the medical staff who were treating him.
So Aboud, how did people become aware of this? How did they get the sense that they can go to Israel and trust the Israelis?
That's a good question, and I believe Lieutenant Colonel Dror could actually answer to that, because that's a very good question. I believe at the beginning it wasn't planned. Just wounded civilians just started, if I understand from Lieutenant Colonel Dror's previous talks, civilians just started showing up at the border fence, and this was completely unexpected, I believe. Correct? Yeah.
Eyal, was this an operation that sort of developed out of necessity rather than a pre-planned strategy?
Yeah, so the beginning, the first days weren't planned. The first stage was when Syrian people just reached the border fence and asked for help. Now they knew, and this is what is so amazing in this issue, because they knew in their minds that they are going to be dead at that night. We asked them a question: why did you come? And they tell, we knew that you are going to shoot us because you are the Israelis, you are the devils. But we understood that here it will be a quicker death. But the Israeli soldiers, and I want the audience to understand, when I'm speaking about Israeli soldiers, I'm not speaking about people in my age. I'm speaking about soldiers who are in the age of 18, 19, 20. This is the age of the soldiers that are protecting the border. And they took a decision with their commanders at that night in February 2013 to open the border fence, and I call it literally to open the heart. And from there, after several days that it happened, we understood that we cannot stop it, and then it became more strategic plan. This is how the Good Neighbor unit were created. And if I will allow, I want to use another slide to answer what Aboud spoke about, the meaning of the risk and the threat. There is a lot of kinds how you can convince people who dislike you, who don't agree with your opinions, how you can convince them. What I learned in these 3 years, that there is nothing better than to do. We can write thousands of letters and speak and say and promise. When I'm going to the border fence on a winter night, or when it is snow, or when it is an Israeli holiday, and nobody forced me to do this, the Syrian side understand it. How do I know it? Because this is thing that while it was raining cats and dogs and we met on the border fence, he told me, I know, my friend, that the easy way was to cancel that particular operation tonight, but you refused to do this. So we appreciate, and this was the thing that built the trust. Now, another issue how you building the trust, take a look at that picture, for example. Again, I will describe the operation later on, but I want to describe the situation. You can see here soldiers with 2 mothers and 2 sons, a baby and a boy. Now, to understand, we are not having a walk on the 5th Avenue. We are going to the border fence controlled by ISIS or Hezbollah or Al-Qaeda, all the haters of the state of Israel. For the people who were in the Golan Heights, you can maybe remember that the topography of this area is mean that I'm down and the enemy is higher up. In my language, a military language, it's a huge disadvantage. You cannot describe it otherwise. But let's go back to that situation. We are opening the border fence to do a wonderful thing. Everybody can agree here, but with zero intelligence. The meaning, I don't know if that woman, or if that woman, for example, just before she crossed to Israel, got a phone call and was forced to deliver a bomb to the Israeli soldiers because her family has been kidnapped by ISIS or by Hezbollah. We don't know this. And I think that everybody can understand if she got such a phone call, what she would probably do. The understanding for the Syrians that this is what we are doing, risking our own lives every night. And it was 700 humanitarian operation. 700 times we chose to risk our lives for the Syrians. It's the appreciation, and this is, Michelle, how you build the trust and why they were convinced that it is safe to go to Israel. Back to you, Anabud.
As you say, Eyal, I mean, the Israeli soldiers, these are essentially kids. To put it in American perspective, people that have just finished high school, 18, 19-year-old kids, now risking their lives by welcoming someone that, as you say, could very well be wearing a suicide bombing vest underneath their clothes. Not an uncommon thing, unfortunately, in the region. So, Eyal, I want to go to a point that Abud had mentioned, and that there was this sense of cynicism that Israeli intentions were to essentially exploit the situation for positive propaganda, that there was an ulterior motive and it was exploiting the wounded. What do you say to that?
Well, I can say to you that if we want to publish it, or if we just wanted to do it for a propaganda, we didn't have to do 700 humanitarian missions. In South Syria, when the NGOs is working, and it's very rarely, but what they're doing, they are giving a small box with some groceries and doing 100 films of thank you this organization and sharing the word how they're helping the Syrian miserable civilians. We could have done 50 operations to picture it, to send it all over the world and all day long to speak about it. We didn't publish it until July 2017. Just after almost 400 operations, it was the first time that we allowed to expose what we are doing. So I think you can understand that we didn't do it for PR. I can tell you why we did it. And I want you to take a close look about those children. We did it for these children. We did this because when we met those children in a specific operation that every week we took 25 of them who wasn't wounded from the war. They were poor children suffering from chronic diseases. We heard the stories of them. We heard the story of this beautiful girl who claimed that they are running from home to home 12 times in the last 6 years. We heard this testimony of this beautiful boy. He was in the age of my biggest girl. He was 7 years old when I met him on the hospital. And when I asked him, when you will be adult, what do you want to do? He wasn't respond until the third time I was asking, and then he told me, I will not be an adult. And when I asked him shockingly, why you're telling me this, he told me, because this is what happened to my friends. So the reason why we did it, it wasn't for PR. It was to get those pictures. It was the understanding that we have the power to give those children a little bit hope. Now, I cannot forget that we are Jewish people. If you will read the Holocaust survivor testimonies, everybody will be able to understand that what kept them alive was the hope. And this was my mission, to give hope to the Syrian children and their parents, that one day, maybe the terrible inferno that they were living will end. This was the mission, and this was what gave me the power to continue doing this by risking my life day after day, night after night.
Now, Abud, unfortunately, the atrocities of the civil war continue. The brutality of the attacks persists. There is still no resolution to this situation in Syria right now. How are the Syrians, or the ones that you're in contact with, viewing Israel at this time?
Well, I don't speak to anybody inside Syria itself right now. Syrians right now, I mean, people ask me, has what Israel's done resulted in a sea change in the view that Syrians, in the way that Syrians view Israel? It's pretty hard to actually assuage that, to understand that right now, because the thing is, here's what you have to understand about Syrians right now, who left Syria. It's only been like a few years. It's been 3 or 4 years since they left Syria. It is too much to ask of a community that has become its own diaspora, so to speak, just within a few short years, to weigh in on politics. Syrians, right? If you don't, I hear so many anecdotal stories of Syrians who, when they meet Israelis abroad, they reach out and they just express their appreciation. Because let me just sidetrack for a bit and tell you a bit of a story. It's not just on the Golan that Israelis have been helping Syrians. If you guys remember in 2015, the huge wave of migrants that landed in the Balkans in Europe, talking about millions of refugees, all landing in Greece, hundreds of thousands. And so imagine yourself, you're a migrant, you get on a raft, you land on this strange continent, you don't know the language, you don't know anything about it, you don't know what you're going to do, you just know that you either had to do this or you had to, for the welfare of yourself and your family. And what do you find? You find volunteers from Israel Aid, an Israeli NGO. They're Arabic speaking, they provide you with food, they provide you with medical treatment, they provide you with warm clothes, and they provide you with advice, maybe. Imagine, I mean, when I came to Canada, when I landed in Canada, I came a very civilized way. I got on an airplane in Istanbul, I landed at Pearson Airport, I got off the airport. But even then, I was apprehensive. You're very apprehensive when you land in a new country, especially when you come as a refugee. Imagine how scared all those hundreds of thousands of migrants must have been when they landed in the Balkans. And what do they see? They see Israel Aid, who are there on the beaches, giving all these migrants the treatment that they needed. And yes, Syrians who got to Europe definitely won't forget that. And I've been hearing anecdotal stories, but to ask Syrians as a group to come out and to express these things, I think it's a bit too early for them, because they're not really settled yet in their own communities. So give them time, but I believe it'll happen.
You say, Aboud, that it's challenging to ask for some kind of group consensus on this, but that you have heard a tremendous amount of positivity through anecdotes. But then you look at someone such as yourself, who was a refugee, and you've taken a very big political position on this. I mean, you have a pro-Israel website following your experience. So what do you think was the catalyst that made you be so outspoken?
Crushing disappointment. At the end of 2013, I found myself in a situation where all the values that I had been brought up to believe in, that would sustain me, Arab values, Islamic values, whatever, they failed me when I needed them. In Syria, we never thought things would get so bad. We never thought that Syrians would turn their guns on each other. We saw that the bad days of Hama in 1982, when the Syrian government crushed an entire city, were over. And then you find that other Arabs are coming to Syria to kill Syrians. The people who you thought were your friends turn out to be your enemies. And then all of a sudden you find that the people who you were taught from the very beginning, who you always perceived to be your adversaries, were going out of their way to risk a lot and expending a lot of resources to help your countrymen and women when nobody else would. You're talking about a crisis of identity, I suppose. It's like you don't know who your friends are anymore, but you do learn who your friends are when at your time of most need. I mean, anybody here has friends. You go and you socialize, you go out to restaurants and you visit each other. Well, imagine yourself where you have a situation where you need people. Maybe you have, God forbid, health problems or financial problems or anything like that. Things out of your control. Life happens. That's when you learn who your real friends are. I was in a position where I didn't have anybody left in Syria anymore, no relatives. So if I wasn't going to speak out, who else was going to do so? And it was the intransigence of the National Coalition that actually was a breaking point for me. They were the ones who were supposed to speak out. All these politicians, all these media personalities who were so eager to get their faces in front of news agencies, none of them were speaking out. I mean, I'm sorry, this is a bit of a long answer. I want to mention the White Helmets. The White Helmets, or a group of civil defense volunteers who helped people when towns were bombed. They it's like the fire department and the ambulance staff inside Syria in a war zone. Now, these White Helmet members, when the regime reasserted control over the area next to the Golan, they had to be evacuated. Canada, Chrystia Freeland, at the time who was foreign minister, she came up with an initiative where she wanted help to get these White Helmet members and their families outside of Syria before the regime caught them. Because if the regime caught them, they were dead. They were absolutely dead. Think about people hiding. Think about World War II. People hiding, people who were wanted by the Nazis in World War II. What would the Gestapo have done to such people? They would have executed them. That's pretty much the same thing that would have happened to them in Syria. So what does Chrystia Freeland, Canada, does? It goes and appeals to Israel. It asks them, please help us get the White Helmets out, and let's relocate them to other countries in the region. And I think Lieutenant Colonel Dror can actually speak to that.
Eyal, I do want to bring you in on this question of resources, because Israeli aid, as Aboud mentioned, extends well beyond the Middle Eastern region. It extends to basically any time that there is some kind of disaster in the world, be it a natural disaster or otherwise. You do find Israelis the first to send supplies, or certainly amongst the first to send supplies, to send medical help, to send donations and such. Even in the US, in the aftermath of certain hurricanes, you've had Israeli teams. How is this viewed in Israel, a country which, and I'm going to bring it back to the Syrian focus, because that's what you were involved in specifically. Was there consensus, if you will, amongst the Israeli public that this is the best use of Israeli resources, that Israeli medics should be allocating their time to people who essentially are sworn to their destruction?
So there is two parts to this question. First of all, and this is fact, this operation cost the state of Israel and the Israelis hundreds of millions of dollars. We didn't get any allowance from the UN or the EU or from other government. It was all sponsored by Israel. However, a lot of from the equipment that we were delivered was sponsored by NGOs that we work with, equipment worth approximately $100 million were donated to this project by our NGOs, and in which we had a Christian organization, a Jewish organization, a Muslim organization. They donated a field hospital that built Eastern to Defense, and they help us to provide equipment that we built a maternity hospital in which 1,000 babies has been born, and a bakery, and hundreds of tons of medicines provided to the clinics. So a lot of from this was sponsored by the NGOs. Now, about the Israelis people, yeah, there was 1% who criticized us why we're not bringing this kind of money for the Israelis who are in need. But 99% from the Israeli public was with this project. Again, because the picture that you just saw, in the 40s, unfortunately, there wasn't any country to stand beside, it wasn't Israel, beside the Jews, and 6 million people from our country has lost their lives. Today we had, thanks God, the power to help the poor people. And I think that every Israeli was very proud of that. Now, when you saw and when you heard their stories, I can assure you that the medical teams and the soldiers and the companies, everybody who were involved in this project was so proud and share it. I can give you, for example, an initiative from the Golan Heights residents. There are approximately 30,000, 25,000 Israelis living in the Golan Heights in approximately 30 villages. So they make an initiative with the cooperation with us of collecting secondhand clothes, and we send our trucks to every village to take the hundreds of tons of clothes to deliver to the Syrian side. And it wasn't by order or by asking. It was an initiative from the people of the Golan Heights who saw what happening just a mile from their home and decided to help. So most of the Israeli public were with this project, and I can tell you that the people who were participating in it were proud and told them, us and their parents and their families, how this operation made them better citizens, better people. So I think it is a good achievement of this operation. Just one note regarding to what Abud say, if I have the time, Michelle, about the white helmets people, because to understand the situation, it was the last days of this region before the regime completely conquered it. It was 6 weeks of heavy bombing in which 50,000 people ran away from their villages and set 500 meters from the Israeli-Syrian border, and we treated them. Now, those white helmets people, as Abud said, they were all condemned to death and they couldn't escape to Syria because the southern border between Jordan and Syria was reconquered by the regime. The only opportunity was to go to Israel, and we had to open the border fence for over 10 hours, in which more than 400 people crossed the border. It was men and women and children and babies, families. Now, it was amazing. I was, of course, there. I coordinate this operation in the field level with the white helmets people. It was amazing to stand on that moment on the border. We saw the clashes. We heard the shooting between the regime and the rebels forces. It was 200 meters from us, a quarter of a mile from us. We saw it on the air. We saw the bullets on the air. And it was amazing to see those people gripping of fear while standing in Syria, and we then entered the state of Israel, which was until a few years ago, like I mentioned, the devil. They were smiling and understanding that their lives has been saved. Now, our part in the operation was to rescue from the border, and we moved them, traveled them to Jordan. They crossed to Jordan and got new identities and new lives. But believe me, they will not forget the state of Israel.
Eyal, we have received some questions from the panelists, which I do want to bring in, from the participants rather, which I do want to bring in now. And I think there's a need for people to get a little bit more of the specifics of the operation, some details of how you say people came across the border. Tell us about the field hospitals that were set up and what would happen to them post-treatment, where they were sent, where they went.
Just a second. I think that the best okay, so one of the examples of this operation was this. We spoke about the collaboration and facilities. So take a look at this. This is a field clinic. It treated 8,000 Syrian people. It was built by an American organization, Christian people, in which the Syrian people got first aid, like family doctors, antibiotics, not surgeries, not ultrasounds, but very simple needs, something that they do not have in Syria. And when we spoke about hope, so you can see the children playing, even eating ice cream. This was the first time for this girl eating ice cream in her life, or for this boy hugging a teddy bear. And we spoke about what we have done else. So codes, very basic thing. I don't think that any of us is thinking about the coat, but again, just see the picture. When you are living in a tent, in the snow, a coat will save your life. So just imagine how many lives has been saved by providing 350 tons of clothes. Or if we're speaking about flour and meat, thousands of tons of food, including baby powder milk and diapers. This is the basic things for babies, how babies living in these terms. And I told you before that we established a maternity hospital, a semi-Western maternity hospital in which 1,000 babies were born. Until that moment, the mothers were doing it at their home because it wasn't any hospital. It was two facilities that when you saw it in the beginning, the picture of the emergency room, you can understand how clean it is and how sterile it is. So we built their maternity hospital and a diesel fuel. When you don't have any electricity, you cannot have water. When you have diesel, you can walk the wheel. You can have some light. You can warm yourself a little bit, over than 1 million liter diesel fuel. So all of these were the products that provided. How it happened, it was a communication between us for several people in the Syrian side, from doctors to, let's say, Syrian representative of families, because it wasn't villages. It was families, 200 families escaping from their village, reaching to another village and contact us in asking for help. And it was coordinated. It was very, very complicated mission. Of course, I cannot share all the details how we did it, but it was a communication, direct communication between us and the Syrians, and we guide them exactly in which day, in which date they should come to where in the fence, if we wanted to take them to the hospitals or if we wanted to provide them some food, clothes, whatever it need. They knew how to pick and when to reach to pick it.
So, Aboud, what was the sentiment of the people returning? I mean, how you said that you were in Homs and then you were in Turkey. How were you able to hear about this?
Well, I heard the first reports coming out were actually on the internet. It was actually rumors. There was no official acknowledgement by the Israeli government until I believe until early 2014. What was the reaction of people who were coming back? I saw a few videos of people expressing their appreciation. Just recently, a Syrian refugee in Cyprus took his baby infant boy. His baby infant boy had a life-threatening heart condition, and in Cyprus they couldn't treat it. So what did they do? They asked Israel to treat this baby boy, it's just incredible. It's incredible. I mean, Israel is under no obligation at all to provide all the amazing help and treatment that it's been giving Syrians, but they do it out of compassion. And this man, he did come on video and he expressed his immense gratitude towards Israel. And he said that we were always taught that Israel were our enemies, and no, Israel is actually our best friend. And those were sentiments that I would see that I would see online. Unfortunately, there's a limit to that. We mentioned all the help that Israel gave to the White Helmets. Well, what do you think the actual organization, the statement that they put out? It was the worst piece of ingratitude I've seen in a while. They said yes that other countries had helped to get White Helmets out of Syria. But they did not acknowledge Israel in any way. They called the Golan, the occupied Golan Heights, Jolan al-Muhtal. Well, I don't know whether I could blame them, because the White Helmets still have to operate inside Syria. They need the support of the armed groups. Their members, if they were seen to be taking a pro-Zionist stance, that would have been the end of them in Syria. I guess they just felt in no position to be able to acknowledge all the help that that Israel had been given to Syrians. But this is, you see, there is unfortunately there is a limit inside Syria and in places like Lebanon, for example. Do you think that if I was sitting in Beirut right now, I could be having this Zoom chat? Absolutely not. No way.
You don't think it's had any impact in changing perceptions at large in the region?
Oh, absolutely, it has. Definitely, most definitely. But here's the problem. What's the point of it being able to change perceptions if people are too afraid to speak out? That's the problem. People cannot act on their new perspective. There's still, I mean, in Syria at least, people are still obligated to take the line that Israel is our enemy. You know, it's either if you're in the regime areas or in the opposition areas. I think that you mentioned my blog that I started to write when I was in Istanbul. Well, this was in 2013, 2014. I stopped writing it in late 2015 when to be seen as pro-Israel in Turkey at the time. This was it was at the end of 2016 when I stopped writing the blog. Because even in Turkey right now, where I used to have the safe space to say all the things that I've been saying, I could not say that today if I was in Istanbul. Unfortunately, that is the reality of the region. Unfortunately.
You know, Eyal, I want to bring in some of the panelist questions as they seem to go with the flow of the conversation here. Lori Goldberg is asking why there hasn't been a bigger campaign by Israel to make the world aware of this. I saw you kind of smiling when Aboud was talking about the response from the white helmets, and I understand the security concerns. I know that the incentive was not a PR campaign or propaganda effort, but it was motivated by genuine goodwill. But I'm getting a sense of frustration from some of the participants that this isn't well publicized. Why is that?
So first, I can agree with all the participants. Yeah, when it was happening, we couldn't have published it. Again, there was two kinds of thinking: to publish it or to do it. If we have published it earlier, the operation couldn't have happened because the Syrian will go back and take step forward, backward, because it were, okay, so you are like everybody, you are coming here to do the PR. When we start to publish it, again, from July 2017 till the end of the project in August 2018, we publish it even in foreign media. Unfortunately, we are better doers than speakers. We don't know how to publish what we are doing. And I'm not speaking just about the good neighbor. I would mention Israel, and there is so many organizations that helping all over the world, and we're not doing it for publishing. Now,
right.
We should do it? No, we shouldn't do it for PR. Should we do it and then to take some credit? Yeah, I think so. This is, for example, why when I retired a year ago from the army, I decided that instead of, a former lieutenant colonel, it's very respectable rank in Israel, especially in the Upper Galil, the area that I'm living, I was easily be able to get a job as a manager of a factory, a good salary, a car, a phone, everything. But I decided that people should hear this story, and this is what I'm doing today. I'm doing, until the corona, I was twice in the States and twice in the UK, meeting students, meeting people, meeting communities, not just Jewish, also Christian communities, in order to share with them that story, in order that people will understanding that if a person will hear it, for sure, for example, our audience will hear it, they will share it with one friend, two friends. This is how we are sharing this knowledge. So for me, it's now like a mission. Of course, we need people like Aboud and the other that know how to help Israel to do what we are not very good in it. But again, if you will ask me what I prefer to do or to speak, I'm a better doer than a speaker.
If I could say something?
Go ahead.
Yes, I've been seeing a lot of sentiments saying, why hasn't Israel gained some sort of PR advantage from this? And people are saying that Israel is bad at PR. I would like to say, let's not turn something, a remarkable act of compassion that Israel did, into a failure. Let's not look on the side that, oh, well, Israel isn't getting any PR. Do you expect Israel to suddenly be loved in the region or by detractors? The challenges that Israel faces on the PR front is one that no other country in the world faces. It is ridiculous. It is ridiculous. I mean, Conan O'Brien, when he visited Israel in 2017, he went and actually met with Syrians who were being treated at the Zev Medical Center. And he actually said, the Israeli doctors who were treating the Syrians, they deserve the Nobel Prize. And any other country would have gotten the Nobel Prize for what it's been doing, well, for half the things that Israel has been doing. But let's not underestimate the demonization that has been going on against Israel constantly. Yesterday, I saw this ridiculous tweet that was stolen from Chile, and then somebody in Pakistan was claiming it happened in Israel, and it had thousands of likes and some lies against Israel spread. But here's the thing: let's not focus on that. Don't expect a PR miracle, but acknowledge the fact that right now we are seeing an opening up in relations between the Gulf states and Israel. Now go ahead, Michelle.
Well, you make a good point, and that is Israel is not very good at shameless self-promotion. That Israel as a country has always excelled at doing rather than talking. As Eyal said, it's more important to get the good work done than to get the credit for the work. And by the way, I entirely recommend that people do look at that Conan O'Brien visit to Israel. It's humorous, but it does really reflect a lot about the spirit of the region. Eyal, just so people understand, the operation is not currently ongoing. Tell us when it ended, why it ended, and what the status is right now with regards to Israel and the Syrian civil war, which, as we said, unfortunately, is still very much ongoing, and civilians are still subjected to atrocities of the Bashar al-Assad regime.
So the operation came to an end in August 2018 after 700 humanitarian operation, as Ella mentioned, after we saved the life of thousands of Syrians, providing hundreds of tons of equipment and treating 1,400 children and 4,500 wounded in Israel. The regime reconquered this area again, the Quneitra and Dara, which is the two regions close to the Israeli-Syrian border. The regime conquered it, and when now we have a government there, of course, we cannot cooperate with the civilians, or they cannot cooperate with us. When they reach, we ask through the UN task force, who is in this area, and its mission is to keep the ceasefire agreement from 74. We ask them to speak with the Syrian regime, and we offer to continue supporting those civilians in the Syrian terms. Unfortunately, they didn't even bother to answer about our asking. So the situation is that operation came to an end. Now the situation today is quite worried for the Syrians and for the Israelis. The regime, the Assad regime, do not give or didn't do nothing for the relief of the Syrians. They're still living in very severe conditions. Every day there is demonstration in the last months against the regime. People are dying, slaughtering day after day. People are dying. People are suffering from hunger. People are suffering from lack of electricity. I think that the situation of some of them is might be worse than when it was in 2016, 2017. For Israel now, there is a new front, and this is something that I'm always speaking about it in other talks, but to understand a little bit the meaning, Iran, which is far away, over than 1,000 miles from Israel, using Syria because they ordered in the past Hezbollah to fight the Assad regime war against the rebels, and they have a very wide presence in Syria. So they are using Syria in order to try to open a new front against Israel. It's not just that in the north we have Hezbollah. Today we see the Hezbollah in the Iranian regime on our eastern border. And as I mentioned before, it's 100 kilometers, 60 miles, and they are using a lot of efforts to establish their missionary tactical forces with missiles, well equipment. It's the Shia militias. I think that most of the audience heard from time to time about mysterious bombing in Syria. It was taking responsibility by Israel that we declared loud and clear that we will not allow the Iranian and Hezbollah presence in Syria. This is a huge challenge for the state of Israel, a huge challenge I think in my own perspective, it may be the biggest challenge that Israel will deal in the next years. It's not Gaza, it's not Judah and Samaria. This is the area, Lebanon and Syria, and the presence of Hezbollah and Iran, 40 kilometers, 15 kilometers from the Israeli-Syrian border.
Abu Eyal is mentioning there the Israeli Defense Forces have enacted targeted military strikes on hostile targets in Syria, mostly Iranian military targets. The war continues to go on, but we have seen, if you will, a warming of relations, at least on a clandestine level, between Israel and some of its Sunni Arab neighbors, United Arab, Saudi Arabia, UAE. How much of that do you think is based on the Iranian factor, under the premise of the enemy of my enemy is my friend? Is it really just about fighting the common enemy of Iran, or is there something else developing?
Oh, no, I would say that that was an impetus for it, but it's not the main factor. No, by no means. Let's not be cynical about this. If that was the only factor, then the ties between Israel and the Gulf states could have been very clandestine, and they could have gotten cooperation on that level. But now you're seeing very prominent members, journalists and professors and members of Saudi and Emirati society all coming out and expressing their admiration, not just for Israel, but for Jews in general. People asked me, I remember 2 years ago, they're saying, Aboud, how could you say the things that you've been saying? Aren't you concerned whether people will dislike you for it? And I used to tell them, you know what? Just wait 2 years. Just wait 2 years. What I've been saying will turn out to be very tame compared to what you're going to be seeing other Arabs, especially in the Gulf, are going to be saying. Well, I was wrong. It didn't take 2 years. It only took 1 year, And you just the thing is, the Gulf states saw that Israel was helping Syrians. Now, that means a lot in Arab culture, because it means that when Israel says it'll do something, it does something. When Israel has principles, it'll stand by its principles. The Gulf states know where they stand when it comes to Israel. Now, that's been very problematic for the Gulf states with regards to other groups. They have supported lots of different groups in Syria and in Lebanon who have eventually turned against them. In Syria and Lebanon, you don't know who's going to be your friend one day, who's going to be your enemy the other. People of one political camp will turn when there's will turn against their former friends and benefactors when there's a slight advantage to do so. But when it comes to Israel, the Gulf states have seen you have a government, and you have a state, and you have a people who stand by principles. When they say they're going to do something, they will do it. So, like, when you deal with Israel, you know where you stand, basically. Yeah.
I think, Abu, thank you. I think I want to open it up now more directly to some of the questions from our participants. And I see we have a question from Richard Colkine, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And Richard says that in 1976, during the Lebanese Civil War, Israel operated a similar program, the Good Fence program on the Lebanese border. And Eyal, I'm going to direct this to you, because he's asking whether the Good Fence program was in fact some sort of a blueprint for the Syrian operation.
So there is a huge difference between the two programs. The situation in Lebanon that Israel was inside Lebanon, and yeah, the Good Fence was an amazing program, and we learned from it. We heard from the people who built this program, and we asked them a lot of questions about how they did it. It was honestly, the Good Fence was very wide problem, wider several times than Israel, because Lebanese people reach to work in Israel. This is something that we didn't manage to do in the Syrian border, because again, the Syrian issue was very short. But this is one thing that it is very important to know, that because a few years after Israel conquered a piece of Lebanon, South Lebanon, and we were inside, it means that everything that we did was condemned to be failure, because we were like occupation. In Syria, it was a little bit different, because we sat behind our fence. We weren't inside Syria. So it's two different programs. Again, the good fence was huge and wider several times from our good fence in Syria. We learned a little bit, and we took some principles because we understood that it will be for short time. So we took some of their principles and, let's say, build it in other ways to make it good and well for the Syrians people. Again, there is also a lot of change between the 70s and 40 years after. The Lebanese weren't such hater for the state of Israel like the Syrians. Again, it was another 40 years that they were learned to hate us, another some wars. So very good plans for the both of them. But again, I prefer to speak about our program and not the Lebanese.
I want to clarify one of Lori's questions, and Aboud, I'm going to direct this to you. Lori says she wants to know specifically why there isn't more vocal affirmations from the wealthier Arab states, or at least members within those communities, understanding that some of the refugees themselves are too intimidated to speak out, but those that perhaps have more power or a stronger ability to make a difference, there's a question why the wealthy Arabs who appreciate what Israel has done aren't doing more in terms of donations, speaking, and staging rallies. If you can perhaps weigh in on that.
You don't have rallies in the Gulf states. That's unheard of. That's impossible. You will not have a rally in the Gulf states. I mean, we're now seeing a lot of protests in the West. You know, just the West. I mean, they don't have that kind of tradition in the Gulf states. But what you're seeing is, I mean, let's not underestimate the perception in the shifts in the perception that has happened in the Gulf states. You have very prominent Gulf Arabs who are wealthy and who have a lot to lose socially if they say anything unpopular, and they are going out and actually expressing their admiration for Israel and Jews in general, which you wouldn't have imagined being possible 2 years ago. There has been a huge shift that has now become acceptable to, and it's not just their admiration for Israel, but it's actually their disdain for Palestinian nationalism. Now, the Palestinian cause right now is discredited in the Arab world. People don't seem to understand that you cannot raise the Palestinian flag anywhere in the Arab world without being mocked. You cannot wear the Palestinian kafiyah in Lebanon or Jordan or the Gulf without being mocked. The only place where the Palestinian nationalism still has any credibility is on Western campuses and on in certain political camps in the West. But back in the Arab world, nobody cares anymore. Basically.
Aboud, I mean, nobody cares. Is that not perhaps a bit of a strong statement? Because unfortunately, some of these countries do use the Palestinian issue to deflect, sometimes from their own mismanagement, from their own regimes. I mean, of course, certainly Iran does, and I'm not classifying Iran in the same category as the Sunni Arab states. But if we look at the situation right now, and of course, what's very topical is this idea of Israel extending sovereignty over Judea and Samaria, or the West Bank, as the Palestinians would refer to it, an area that we know Israel has historical ties to for millennia. How is that, in your opinion, impacting this potential shift in relations between Israel and some of its Arab neighbors, if Israel were to go ahead and make that move?
Well, I don't think anybody understands exactly what Israel plans, if it plans on anything at the extent of what is planning. There hasn't actually been a clear indication of that. And B, we've been hearing statements. Yes, of course, there was an Emirati ambassador or minister, I don't know what it was. He actually wrote an op-ed in an Israeli newspaper in Hebrew, saying you can either have annexation or you can have good relations. But when you come down to it, this is all what we would call virtue signaling. You know, the Arab world are the experts at virtue signaling. The Arab League have refined it to an art. Since, like, for decades, all they've been doing is putting out statements. Now, we've said before that when Israel says it's going to do something, it does something. The Arab world has a reputation for being the exact opposite. Even King Abdullah of Jordan, what's he going to do? tear up the peace treaty between Jordan and Israel. That's not going to happen. What tangible actions will the Arabs take to oppose Israel asserting sovereignty over the Jordan Valley? Nobody said what they'll tell you, what tangible steps they'll take. I mean, in those Arab countries where hatred towards Israel has been a permanent fixture of politics, such as in Syria and Lebanon and those other kind of states, that's always going to be the fact. That's always going to be a fact. Israel could give the entire West Bank over to the Palestinians right now, and the international community can give them $100 billion in aid, and still you would find the Bashar al-Assad regime will still be an implacable foe of Israel and the Iranians as well. You know, no matter what. But I mean, just last month there was one of the most popular hashtags in the Arab world was Palestine laysat qadiyati. Palestine is not my cause, and this was created organically by Saudi and Emirati internet Twitter users. 2 years ago, that would have been unthinkable. I mean, once you no longer hate Israel, once hatred for Israel is no longer a central tenet of your foreign policy, why would you invest anything in Palestinian nationalism? So yeah.
You know, Aboud, one of the misconceptions that has been perpetuated is that it's the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that is the cause of all strife in the Middle East. And of course, we know that that is completely inaccurate. But the prevailing sentiment somehow in the mainstream media and amongst the Europeans is that if only the Israelis and Palestinians would have peace, then the Middle East would be a better region. And of course, we know that that's not true. And we certainly see that in the case of the Syrian civil war, which remarkably doesn't get much attention anymore in the United States. Certainly, there have been a lot of other headlines that dominate in the Corona times, but the only time that the US was really focusing on the Syrian civil war was when President Trump took the controversial move of removing US forces, and it was seen as a betrayal of the Kurds by some. And I guess the story only got attention then because it was in a way portrayed as a negative reflection on the Trump administration. But we do know that the Trump administration has now imposed further sanctions, the Caesar sanctions. Tell us about those, and if you think that they're going to have an impact now that we're targeting more specific members of the Assad regime, and what that does mean for potentially ending this atrocious conflict.
Not only has the threat of the Caesar sanctions disrupted things for the regime, it's also disrupted things in Lebanon as well, because Lebanon used to be a gateway through which Syria would bypass sanctions. Now, any bank at all that wants to do business with Syria, I mean, there were pretty strict laws concerning banks in the Middle East before. Not only did banks have to know who their clients were, but they had to know who their clients' clients were. Now they got to know who their clients' are when it comes to the Caesar sanctions. No bank will do business with Syria. That's been the case for years. But I mean, it's how is it going to change anything in Syria? No. Regimes are the last ones to be affected by sanctions. Bashar al-Assad's daughter posted pictures of herself on Instagram with her friends shopping in Moscow, and they had all these fancy sports trainers on, trainers that cost a lot of money. The regime's supporters, their sons and daughters, they're flashing their opulence on Instagram, or their fancy cars and their fancy houses and their high life, living outside abroad as well in the United Arab Emirates and in Europe as well. These sanctions won't affect the regime itself. Unfortunately, the only way that anything will change in Syria is if Mr. Vladimir Putin decides that he no longer wants Assad. Basically, that's the short answer.
Right. I do again want to open the conversation to some of the participants. Feel free to continue to send in questions. In the meantime, Eyal, I want to bring it back to the topical issue, of course, of the coronavirus pandemic and how you see this impacting the IDF's ability to continue to help its neighbors and to perhaps utilize this as an opportunity to foster better ties.
So first of all, let's understand that in the Arab countries, well, I will say it honestly, they're not speaking the truth about the numbers of people who are suffering from corona. Second, and it's very fortunate to understand, 1 million Iranian deaths from corona in the eyes of the regime is a very good thing. It's terrible to say this, but this is the fact. You speak before about, or Aboud said that most of the Arab countries do not believe the Palestinians, but the Western world is still. Unfortunately, people who are living in the Western world can't understand, and this is the biggest problem, the Middle East and the interactions and the challenges and what is happening in the tradition and. Do you think really that the Iranian regime or the Turkish regime or the Jordanian regime is taking care for their citizens while suffering from the COVID-19? If so, why didn't they take care of them all of the years with this hundreds of billions of dollars they robbed from their population? Why in the Middle East, 90% of the people suffering from poverty? The regime, let's face it, the regimes all over the Arab countries do not care for their civilians. When we are speaking about sanctions, for example, and this is a good example about their sanction on Iran, if it was a chance that those sanctions or this money from the sanction will be invested in civilians, as an Israeli will say, I will be the first to say, the US government, please stop it. But all of this money is invested in terror, in sponsoring the terror of Hezbollah and the Shia militias. For Israel, again, the borders are closed. We cannot help Lebanon and Syria although in this COVID-19 because those regimes will not get help from us. Jordan got help from Israel. Judea and Samaria and Gaza, although from Gaza it has been shot at rockets during this period of time for Israel, got hundreds of tons of medical equipment, especially to deal with the COVID-19. So for Israel, we are using and we are continuing helping. I'm sure that if the Syrian regime would have passed a request to the UN, to the state of Israel, please give us some equipment to help our civilians with treating the COVID-19, we were the first to jump to this. I will be the first to join again my brigade and go on the border fence to do so. But unfortunately, they will not ask again the countries, or here it's the Palestinian Authority, that it is in contact with Israel. So we are helping them. Again, I'm not aware today about all of the numbers of aid, but again, I know that we're provided help, especially for Gaza and Judea and Samaria. I just want to remind you that it was 2 airplanes landing in Israel from the Emirates, providing humanitarian aid to Judea and Samaria, and President Abbas refused to get it. So who's doing politics on the backs of these people? Airplanes full of medicines and equipment to fight against COVID-19 were landed in Israel, donated by the Emirates, and President Abbas refused to get it. This is a leader who take care for his people? No way, sorry.
Aboud, at what point do the people start to realize this? I mean, is there a sense that their leadership is failing them, or is it just so much of the sentiment is being directed towards anti-Israel hate that it's not developing a backlash against this leadership? Are the people aware that they're being denied aid and donations and support from Israel?
Well, well, this is a question that we have to actually be specific about. If you're asking me about the Gulf Arab states, the Gulf Arab states are actually quite happy with their leadership. right now. Considering everything else that's been going on in the region, they're actually quite happy with their leadership. And it was actually the leadership that actually took the initiative to open up to Israel. Now, with regards to the ordinary Palestinian, I saw a lot of reports about the ordinary Palestinian being asked, would you prefer to live under Israeli sovereignty or under the Palestinian Authority? And the vast majority said, no, we'd rather live under the Israelis. The problem is the Palestinians don't have the space to actually take any action against Abbas and his circle. In Gaza, you can't go up against Hamas. It's impossible. It's like trying to hold a demonstration in Tehran. I believe that Palestinians do actually feel that they are being let down. Can they express that? There have been a few demonstrations against the Palestinian Authority. Will there be a breaking point? Unfortunately, I don't know. I mean, you see the example of other Arab countries, and it's very disheartening. I mean, Lebanon, the Lebanon is dominated by Hezbollah. Lebanon, in a few months, we're going to be hearing very tragic, horrific stories coming out of Lebanon if it keeps going the course that it's going. But has anybody come out and tried to overthrow Iranian and Hezbollah domination of Lebanon? No, nobody has. In Iran, things are atrocious as well over there, but there hasn't been a mass uprising against the Iranian regime either. So if the rest of the region is anything to go by, I don't really know whether we can have any grounds to be hopeful on that with regards to the Palestinian areas.
But I do want to end things on a hopeful note, Aboud. And again, the whole point of this webinar was to remind people of kindness, compassion, of positivity, of the fact that even in the darkest hours, there are rays of light, and sometimes from the most unexpected places, as cliched as it may sound, there is always a silver lining. And as we begin to wrap up here, I just want to give Eyal a chance to share some final thoughts today.
So exactly, Michelle, what you've said, I just want to share with you my final slide, because how we are saying it, Israel, let's finish it with a good taste. So I want you, please, everybody, look at that picture, and I will finish exactly with what I've started. This picture drawn by a Syrian girl who reached the border fence suffering from very hard diabetes. She just had 24 hours to survive. This was the Israeli doctors claimed. And she was here in Israel for 6 months. We had to reconstruct her mouth again. And before she go back to the Syrian border, she drew the flag of Israel. She wrote her name here. This is on the left side. And she wrote here in Arabic the name Abu Yaqub, the father of Jacob. Abu Yaqub was my Arabic name. And this is how I choose to finish my talk for today. The flag of Israel drawn by a Syrian girl who dedicated to an IDF officer who saved their lives. A picture that was behind of an imagination a few years ago and become reasonable thanks to Operation Good Neighbor. This is my last remarks. Thank you, everybody.
All right, thank you, Commander Dror, and thank you very much, of course, for your work and for your service and for the public service of helping to promote all the good work that you've done and helping to promote the Israeli cause as well. Aboud, I just want to give you a chance for your final message today.
I would like all my Israeli friends to know that yes, Israel does get demonized a lot in the international media. Some people seem to have made it a career out of demonizing Israel, but where it matters, Israel is gaining friends. Where it really matters, in the region. Just imagine how implacable opposition to Israel was just as recently as 10 years ago. Israel's integration in the region will be a bigger triumph than even the 1967 war. If that could happen, that would be astounding. And so that is what I would like my Israeli friends to take hope from.
All right, well, I'm gonna end it on that positive note from you. It's good to keep up positivity and recognize the triumph of humanity at times like this. Thank you so much, Aboud. Thank you so much, Eyal. And of course, thank you so much to Avi Kaner for organizing this and for helping to spread the message and the goodwill. And for me, thank you for watching and joining us. I want to turn it over to Avi for his final thoughts. Avi.
Thank you, everyone. You guys are truly awesome. Truly appreciate your all being here today and letting so many people around the world hear in your own voice what happened. These are all incredible stories, but they're real. They're not fiction. Many of the questions we received during the webinar pertain to why don't more people know about this amazing work that Israel's done to help Syrian civilians. And I truly believe it's up to us to spread that word. You know, the same way the Arabs in the region don't really know Jewish people or Israelis, and I think that's changing now with education and universities. It really is up to us to spread it both ways. When I visited the United Arab Emirates last year, I was really skeptical and like almost afraid showing up in Dubai. And as soon as I got into Dubai, I realized I was just as comfortable in Dubai as I'd be on the streets of Tel Aviv or New York. And I'm sure it will be identical. People coming from Jeddah, Riyadh, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, visiting Tel Aviv and Jerusalem will feel just as comfortable as they feel at home. There was, you know, in the Arab culture, the most famous person who was the most faithful, reliable ally ever, his name was Samuel ben Adiyah. And to this day, and he lived in Saudi Arabia 15 years ago, to this day, in the Arab culture, there's an expression more faithful than Al-Samuel. And that's exactly how the relations will be between the Arab world and Israel. And I think now, you know, the Arab world's trying to recognize that, and then hearing stories like this helps make that a reality. So finally, thank you, everyone, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us today. We will plan other similar events in the near future. Hopefully we'll convince Michelle to moderate, because as I said before, there's literally no one better on the planet when it comes to Middle Eastern issues and other issues. Thank you to Aboud and Eyal. You're my friends. Thank you so much for being here, taking the time and sharing such incredible stories. We all pray that the civil war ends quickly and that peace will replace war. We've recorded this discussion and we'll share the link on social media. Once again, thank you, and we look forward to seeing all of you soon. Have a great afternoon or evening. And Michelle, I know your mother's in South Africa. I don't know what time it's in South Africa, but Michelle's mom, Hannah, whatever time it is, thank you for joining us. Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Bye.
Fabulous. Good night. Thank you. תודה רבה. להתראות.
Shalom.